Mr. President, are you going to change any of the practices that your national security officials used after a reporter was inadvertently added to a group chat about attacks on Yemen?
Well, I think it's a question I've been asked now, and I've given a few answers, and they've all been the same. We have an amazing group. Our national security now is stronger than it's ever been. We have had a very, very successful, numerous attacks on that area. These are people that shoot down ships, not only our ships, ships all over the world. They're shooting down right out of the water and damaging them badly, or they're going down. They're also shooting anything that happens to be flying in the area. We hit them very, very hard. There was no classified information, as I understand it. They used a app, if you want to call it an app, that a lot of people use, a lot of people in government use, a lot of people in the media use. And I think I'll ask Mike. Mike is here. Do you want to respond to that, please?
Yes, Mr. President. You asked about lessons. I think there's a lot of journalists in this city who have made big names for themselves, making up lies about this president, whether it's the Russia hoax or making up lies about Gold Star families. And this one in particular, I've never met, don't know, never communicated with, and we are looking into and reviewing how the heck he got into this room. But I'll tell you what, the world owes President Trump a favor. Under Biden, global shipping was shut down. Pinprick attacks, months between them, our destroyers being fired upon dozens of times. President Trump took decisive action with his national security team, took out the head missileer, knocked out missiles, knocked out headquarters, knocked out communication sites. And for once, as we hear, as you all hear from every one of our allies, thank God for American leadership again. Thank God for American strength. You're welcome.
That was literally minutes ago in a live broadcast out of the White House where President Trump was asked about and then discussed this issue that's roiling all of Washington right now, and certainly the administration. They're talking about lots of things they had no interest in talking about. And to bring you up to speed, if you might have missed it, there was a big issue when Jeff Goldberg, a writer for The Atlantic, published a big article that said that he was given text messages. He got onto a text string on the app Signal, where he had all of the principals that were going back and forth about this strike that happened a few days back in Yemen. And according to what he's written, he said there was all kinds of details spread about. They were going back and forth talking about whether there was going to be, this strike or that strike, or what was going to be hit here, what the timing of it was, et cetera. All kinds of people. I mean, up from the Vice President of the United States, the National Security Advisor, the Chief of Staff of the White House, Susie Wiles, and John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, just a whole slew of people. I think they said 18 in all were on top of this. And then somehow there was this writer was added into the group. People didn't know about that because, a lot of these times they just assume that whoever made this string knows what they're talking about. They know that the people are only the people that are there are supposed to be there. So most people don't check to see what that is. They don't have any need to because they have a trust in the system. That's going to come into play here in a minute. But what is remarkable about this situation is that it went public, of course. Now, on first glance, the idea that you're discussing classified information on a non-secure web app, even if it is encrypted, it's a civilian one, it's not a military. That is central to this whole issue. The question is, was there actually classified information discussed on there? So far, all of the participants in there, all those that I just mentioned, and there was some hearings that just happened to be scheduled on Capitol Hill today for the intelligence community. The timing couldn't have been any better or worse, depending on your perspective, to be grilled like this. And so that took center stage instead of what it was supposed to be about. It was about a report on the threats to the United States. That's what the whole thing was scheduled for. It had been on the schedule for quite a long time, but took a definite turn on that when now they're being grilled. And like so many times happens in Washington, D.C., the partisan split was on full display. If you were a Democrat, then you were, badgering the people, asking all these hard questions, not accepting what they were saying and characterizing things in a negative way. And then if you were on the Republican side, you were saying nothing to see here, move on, et cetera. And so we'll see how this shakes out. The big issue is going to be, was there classified information or not? Because a lot of people don't know that this organization called CISA, it's part of the Department of Homeland Security that's responsible for cybersecurity in the United States. It has a published document, which actually came out in December of last year, so during the Biden administration, which specifically said that senior officials in the United States need to have the ability to communicate in some kind of classified or some kind of secure issue, specific from classified, so that they can have discussions in real time, even when they're geographically dispersed. In that document, it specifically authorizes Signal as being something that can be used to have these discussions. Now, implicit in that exceptions is that it not be classified information, because there are separate documents that govern the use of classified information, and those can only be discussed on specifically classified systems. And we have those. Obviously, there's no possibility that those could be have a journalist accidentally come into, because they wouldn't have access to the classified system. And those are, of course, only given to people who are thoroughly vetted and have a need to know and all that kind of stuff. So it really kind of boils down to, was this just discussion between principals? Because at least mostly according to what's being published, is that those are things that the app in itself and the policies were expressly designed to facilitate. You have to have the ability to where these principals can get together and talk about these things, talk about any number of things in an open and uncensored environment. So as long as there is no classified information, that's actually how it's supposed to work. Obviously, it's not supposed to work where a journalist is invited into the room. And from what's been reported by other sources, it was actually the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, who's apparently who made it. Now, you heard him there just a minute ago. That was news that we hadn't heard before. He's claiming he didn't even know Jeff Goldberg. One of the questions that many people were asking initially is that, well, he must have fat fingered it. The guy must have been one of his addressees and he hit that one instead of a different Jeff or something to that effect. But now he's saying he doesn't know him, has never talked to him, has never communicated with him. Ergo, his name shouldn't have even been in his address book. So that's one question that is now a new question that needs to be answered. How was his name even in there that it would have been selected? Because that is kind of a problem. If you didn't put him in there, how did he get in there? And then how did he get on that string? So that is a question that definitely does need to be answered, both for security within the White House as well as the country. We need to know how that happened as well. Obviously, you want to make sure it doesn't happen again. So we need to get into those kinds of issues to discuss them. But in terms of what happened today on Capitol Hill and at the Senate hearing, again, it depends on which side of the aisle you come on to. But I do want to put a couple of things in particular because I think it's kind of illustrative of just kind of where we are.
Is your testimony that it was appropriate that he was added to this signal thread?
No, of course not. And
why
Senator,
did you not call?
Hold on, Senator. You're mischaracterizing my testimony.
Good. You answered the question. Let me ask you: when he was added to the thread, you're the CIA director. Why didn't you call out that he was present on the signal thread?
I don't know if you use Signal messaging app.
I do. Not for classified information, not for targeting,
well, neither
not
do I,
for anything
Senator.
remote.
Neither do I, Senator.
Well, that's what your testimony is today.
It absolutely is not, Senator. Were you not listening at the beginning?
No.
When I said that I was using it as permitted, it is permissible to use.
I agree that's your testimony.
Yeah.
I agree that's your testimony. You asked me if I use it, and I said not for targeting, not for classified information.
And I said I don't either.
You see there that I mean that was convoluted even among the comments that the senator made right there. And you see that in that case he's basically just trying to embarrass the director of CIA, because he said, your testimony is this, you're okay with this. And then Radcliffe says, no, that's not my testimony. I said this. And he goes, well, I agree that that's your testimony. Well, hang on. If you agree that's his testimony, then why did you just say that your testimony went in this other direction, that you were okay with this guy being on there? Obviously, he wasn't okay with it. That's self-evident. It's embarrassing and humiliating to the senator to even go down that path to try and suggest that the CIA director said that it was okay. He obviously didn't. And I think where he was going with this before he was cut off is, I don't know if you're aware of how Signal works, but when you see these messages going back and forth, you have to actually click on the addressee list and then look at all of them. Now, again, because this is something that they ordinarily do, and there hasn't been any reporters on there before, you're not going to go and look and say, all right, who is all these people I want to know, because you trust the system. Clearly, they've been doing this for the whole time since it's authorized by the federal government. So that's the way they had been doing it. So they're not going to be looking at that. Obviously, had he seen a name that didn't belong, he would have raised the alarm bells and he would have said, wait a minute, what's this guy doing on here? So the fact that he didn't means that he was not aware of it because he trusted the system. If the National Security Advisor sets this up, it's natural that you're going to just trust it. Now that this has happened, of course, no one's going to be trusting it for a long time. So now then when there's future groups, I assure you, everybody will be looking very diligently at all the addressee lists to make sure that that's the right people on there and that they're okay with it. But you see that the CIA director, Ratcliffe, tried to tell him what was going on. He tried to answer, but he kept getting cut off. And so in those kind of things, that's just a grandstanding issue that they're not actually trying to get to the truth. It's just trying to make the guy look bad. Ergo, he's trying to make the administration look bad because that's just how it works in Senate hearings. Unfortunately, that works on both sides of the aisle, depending on what's going on at any given time here. But it gets down into the issue, though, of was there classified information or was there not? Now, in this next clip here, we have Senator Kelly, who's also going to be asking some difficult questions here, and at least he's a little bit more senatorial about it.
Controlled unclassified information, according to DOD, includes information that is information that has not been approved for public release. Would you, of what's been disclosed publicly of the signal chain, would either of you feel that would be approved for public release?
I wouldn't approve the release of classified information. Again, as I've said,
I'm not talking about classified information, Mr. Ratcliffe. I'm talking about information that has not been approved for public release. That is information that is considered controlled, unclassified information.
The principles that would have been on that would have been individuals capable of approving that for public release.
So again, though, we're in a situation where he's kind of looking at apples and oranges, not apples and apples. So he's saying this controlled, what was the phrase? Controlled unclassified information. So he's trying to say that there's some information that it's not technically classified, but you're not allowed to use it in open source. Ratcliffe acknowledged that and said, yes, that is the case. We certainly understand that, and we abide by those policies here. But this is a situation here on Signal, as authorized by CISA. The whole point is for the principals to be able to have a conversation and go back and forth and kick things around and say things in a loose kind of way so that they can come to an agreement on whatever the topic is. And by definition, you're not going to want to release that. So now it's maybe controlled information, but we're not talking about just some data here. So nobody is going to want these unfiltered comments to be out in public. That should be self-evident, like it is for every government. I assure you, whether you're talking in a room, whether you're talking on the Signal or any other kind of classified environment or secure environment, there are some things that are not for public consumption, and they're not going to be. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong or that there's a red flag with the fact that they were talking about things that they don't want the public to know. There are some things that the American people deserve to know. We need to know what the policies are that the government is pursuing. We need to know what the objectives are, especially when you're talking about war and peace kind of things. We have a right to know what the truth is, and we don't want that hidden from us. At the same time, simultaneously, there are things at the level of state that need to be kept private, whether that's classified or whether it's just secure. Those are separate issues. But if you make everything public all the time, I mean, just imagine no country in the world ever operates that way, nor could it. Because if every backdoor conversation gets out, of course, it'll be twisted, it'll be parsed, all kinds of things will be said to it, and then nobody's going to talk to you. If, especially in the diplomatic world, they know that private conversations are going to be out there for public consumption or something like that, then no one's going to be talking to you anymore. So that should be self-evidently. You don't conduct affairs of state by blabbering everything all the time out there on the net. So there needs to be a safe place for the principals to have a conversation so that they can come up with whatever the policy is. And then it is up to the president to convey that policy after all the decisions and all the discussions and arguments and everything else that's gone back and forth. That's what needs to be brought out. And I guess that was part of the issue that President Trump just did there was, the whole point of it is a little bit lost. And that's the issue with the Houthis in the Red Sea. And so they talked about that in the open. So they were transparent about what was going on with that as they were actually before that. So the question, though, about whether this is actually classified information, that is still an open question, because all of the senior officials today testified under oath that there was no classified information on there, that there were no war plans that were said. It's presented and discussed on this forum here. That's what they have said. Now, you have Jeff Goldberg, the author of the piece, that says that's not true. He said there was classified information on it, but he's not providing it so far. And a matter of fact, he was on a podcast earlier where he was asked about that. I think it was earlier today, and he was asked about it, but he kind of equivocates.
Now, the Secretary of Defense and the White House press secretary have said you're lying, have said there are no war plans there, have said there's no classified information. So the obvious question is, shouldn't you now demonstrate it? Shouldn't you publish the text?
No, because they're wrong. They're wrong.
But how can you prove that you're wrong? Maybe should you provide them to the House and Senate Special Committees on Intelligence? Maybe. I don't know.
Wow. Well, you want to become my lawyer?
I'm throwing this out there, Jeff. I don't know. I mean, look.
I feel like no. I mean, I obviously. Let me just put it this way: my colleagues and I, and the advice and the people who are giving us advice on this, have some interesting conversations to have about this.
Yeah.
But just because they're irresponsible with material doesn't mean that I'm going to be irresponsible with this material.
Yes, so he's kind of trying to put himself out there as a hero in this issue. But I mean, at some point we have to know, because he's saying that there was classified information, but then he's not going to reveal it. And he's revealed a whole bunch of other stuff. He says that they're lying, but then he won't provide the evidence that shows it's true. Look, I just want the truth. I want to know what actually happened with that. I think most Americans do as well. But at some point, you're either going to have to put up or shut up. If you're claiming it's classified information, then you need to be able to be able to prove that. So we'll see how this works out. I think also during this hearing, you saw some comments by some of the one of the senators, I can't remember which one it was, asked, I think, Radcliffe and Gabbard whether they would agree to have an investigation into this, where people would look at the documents, because obviously they still have the string on the Signal app, so they can go and look. And they both said they would agree to it. So we'll see what comes out of that. In terms of that, you heard in there that the podcaster said, you had the Secretary of Defense has said that it wasn't true. Here is how Pete Hegseth put the whole issue.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning. And you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or at shacks in Yemen. President Trump said, no more. We will reestablish deterrence. We will open freedom of navigation, and we will ultimately decimate the Houthis, which is exactly what we're doing as we speak from the beginning, overwhelmingly.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
That's it.
So we'll have to wait and see how that happens. You have the claims of a lot of different folks, and it's going to require some kind of an investigation at an appropriate level. Take a look at what was written down there. This is not stuff that needs to be put out in public, but somebody who has authority and the gravitas to do that. If it's at the Senate level, it needs to be a bipartisan deal. Definitely can't be just one side or the other. And they need to get to the bottom of it. And if there was something that broke the classification rules and laws, then that has to be dealt with. But if it's not, then we need to say this was just an unfortunate incident to where somehow a reporter's name got on something that in a place that he should never have been. They need to put protocols in to make sure that it never happens again, because the senior people and the senior advisors in the country, they need to keep having these kind of opportunities because they can't always physically get together. So they got to make sure that it's secure, and then we have to make sure we have the ability to do the business of state without leaking it to anybody else or without misusing the platforms to do things that they're not supposed to. We have platforms for that very purpose that are classified and controlled. So that way you don't ever have to worry about this happening because, no reporters have classified document or secure capability. So that might be a lesson that they learned, that they say, all right, from now on, we'll use the secure capabilities even for the non-classified conversations to ensure that they stay secret. That might be a good plan too. We'll have to wait and see how that's going to happen. But anyway, wanted to bring you up to date on all this stuff. A lot of, some political fireworks on the Hill today, and wanted to give you the latest on that. You saw the president and the National Security Advisor addressed it just moments before we came on the air, and we'll keep you up on it as anything comes to this in the future. As any results of any of these investigations, we'll stay on top of it. In the meantime, we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.